I wanted to tell you about a new podcast from HRN. It's called Fed by Blue, and it explores the transformative power of water, showing how the ocean can serve as a sanctuary, a source of renewal, an important source of food, and a profound tool for the fight against nutritional injustice. I'm your host, Jennifer Bushman, Executive Director of Fed by Blue, a nonprofit working to highlight the role of responsibly sourced foods from water in the shaping of the future of our world's foods, and the executive producer of Impact for the James Beard and Emmy-nominated PBS docuseries Hope in the Water. In the show, I'll be sharing behind-the-scenes stories, personal reflections, and interviews with incredible people who bring this work to life. We'll also dive into the science, the psychology, and the magic of the water itself, and how it's playing an urgently needed role in the future of food, one wave at a time. Whether you're a longtime ocean lover or simply just curious about the life-changing potential of nature's most powerful source, this podcast is for you. So join me as we explore the stories of resilience, courage, and transformation, and discover just how much hope can be found in the water. Find Fed by Blue wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, this is Dana Cowin, and you are listening to the Progressive Hedonist podcast. I am super excited today to share with you my interview with Imani Black, who founded Minorities in Aquaculture, also called MIA, which is an acronym I love because these minorities are missing. They are MIA. She said that idea came to her on a drive sometime, and I'm like, Imani, that is the greatest name. Having spent a lot of time naming things, I really appreciated that. So before I get into the interview with Imani, I just want to talk a little bit about my relationship with the water. My husband's family has been on the coast of Maine for the entire time that I've known him. I've had the opportunity to go on lobster boats. I even got to do something once with lobster of Maine, just learning more and more and more about lobster. Anyway, who cares? I really love lobster. But when you're on the coast of Maine and you're on a lobster boat, or you're on shore at some place called Five Islands, which is, in case you're curious, my favorite lobster shack in the world, and I've been to many because, as I said, I love lobster. There are no people of color on the water. It is palpable. So when I learned about Imani's work and her path to getting more people of color on the water and her own incredible story, I had to talk to her. Imani's family has been on the Maryland shore for a couple of 100 years on the water. Water was always part of their lives. Never did she think that she was going to end up being someone with this as their primary mission. All it took was one camp, and she was done. She was in. So Imani has made tremendous strides and changes for all of us, giving access to the water. But in addition to this, she is delightfully opinionated about how to know when you're getting the best seafood. She can name the best oyster farmers in America. I left this conversation with an appreciation of her family heritage, the opportunities for young people on the water, but also a really, really good list of where to go eat oysters in America. I give you Imani Black. Imani, I'm so excited to talk with you today. I know that your family has been on the shore of Maryland for hundreds of years, which is incredible. I would love to know what it feels like to have a family that has been in the same place for so many generations.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for having me today. And I've been such a huge fan of the podcast, so this is like such an honor. Um, but, my mom figured out our genealogy when I was around 16 or so. And it was sort of made sense because I'm kind of the black sheep of my family, where like I've got a lot of like health services, like nurses and dentists and doctors and just principals and teachers and things like that in my family. And, then I'm like, I'm going to be a marine biologist or marine scientist. And they were like, where does this come from? So when my mom figured out our genealogy and realized that we had, black watermen dating back into our family in multiple areas of, Maryland. So for me, it became not just only about my family history, but just the overall just historic occupation of watermen in the Chesapeake Bay is just, declining at the same time.
I have so many questions. First, why, when you were growing up, was it a horrible thing?
I think growing up, there was this stigma and perspective where it was like, there's nothing for you here. Like if you want to do something bigger, like have a bigger career, like your small town's like not the place to do it.
So are there any stories that from those watermen in your family that you can share? Were people captains of boats, or were they pickers, or what were they doing on the water?
Yeah, so they were mostly like working in all the fisheries, mostly crabs, like specifically, but it's scattered around. So there's like no like true stories that I've gotten. But the cool thing is that being from one area, some of our family structures are still standing. So like I didn't realize that when I was working at the last oyster hatchery, in my career, I was passing by generational houses that were just worn down and desiccated and things like that. But it was exactly where my family kind of grew up. And I'm related to, unfortunately, he passed last year, but he was the last skipjack captain of the Chesapeake Bay, Captain Kermit Travers. He's actually my second cousin. And he grew up in Blackwater Refuge, like in Cambridge, like right where I was working. And so just those stories of like, you can still see the history.
That's beautiful that it's on the block. So it's imprinted in the place. And actually, you had done some research and learned about Chestertown, Maryland, and the way that Black people were treated in Chestertown. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
In 2020, I got the opportunity to do like an environmental justice walk with a partnered organization called Shore Rivers that's on the Chesapeake Bay as well. That really focuses on like citizen science and, everything like that in the Chesapeake Bay. So we did that. And I learned so much just by walking around my hometown and not realizing that like, oh, like by the water, like right across the river, like where I grew up was one of the most famous Black saloons, or one of the most famous saloons in history on the Chesapeake Bay. Like, Queen Elizabeth came over and came to this saloon. The historical plaque is still there on the house. And even where, the Chestertown Fire Department used to be a saloon right there. So we got to see some old pictures. We got to like follow this trail. There used to be a river or like a stream that ran down to the Chester River through Chestertown. And of course it's like paved over and built over, but you can still walk it because you can see the divots and the crevices of the land. And then it actually goes to a stormwater drain that goes out to the Chester River. So it's like, just like hometown stories just then came out when talking to locals of like, oh yeah, like when I was growing up, like, the bricks that were specifically in places of town, those were the only places that African Americans could go. Or like once you got to a certain type of brick or a certain like deviation of brick, like that's where like my parents would tell me like, that's not for us. And we would, turn around or whatever. But, the multi-million-dollar homes that are, along the Chester River right now, they were slave homes. You can tell if a house was a slave master's house by the doorway. So like, how bricks are the long side when you build them? Well, in these doorways, like around the door would be the short side of the brick. And which has no structural sound in it at all. And like just little things like that. You're just like, once you know the little things, you're like, you can't unsee it now.
So tell us about oysters and oyster restoration. Oysters are incredibly important to the environment, which is indeed why on Progressive Hedonist podcast, we're talking today about aquaculture and talking with you.
I love this question. Yeah, no, oysters are one of our primary keystone species in a lot of bodies of water, but especially Chesapeake Bay. Keystone species are a species that is the center point for all other species. So because oysters grow in reefs, they grow together. They're very communal creatures. They need to in order to spawn. They are creating like crevices and sort of like a coral reef would for all these like little fish and crabs and vegetation to grow and just like their water quality. So it just becomes an epicenter for all of these organisms that rely on these oyster reefs. So if you were to remove that species, other species would then be affected by it, which has happened. So, oyster restoration has been super important in Chesapeake Bay, since our historical numbers, really declined from oyster diseases, MXX and dermal. And oyster aquaculture was introduced in the 1990s to be able to really mitigate this situation that we were having of like, how do we nourish and nurture and preserve and kind of rebuild and rebound our oyster population while also, doing what we're known to do, which is oysters and crabs and everything like that. It's such a key point of our economy in the Chesapeake Bay and a lot of coastal communities. So that's where oyster aquaculture came in. It was like a way to not only have an oyster that can combat those oyster diseases, but also be able to be hardy and viable for the commercial side as well.
So how does oyster aquaculture work? And when you were doing the seeding and the harvesting, that was in an aquaculture setting, I guess?
Yeah. So most of my career, I've done kind of all the different stages of the oyster aquaculture cycle, but most of my career has been in the hatchery, which is the first part of the oyster aquaculture cycle. So that's where you're growing your microalgae. So the simplest way I can put it is babies, teenagers, adults. That's how you can think about the 3 stages. And so when you got the babies, right, you are spawning the adult oysters. So usually what we do on a farm is we have different families or different adults that we cycle through on the farm. Then, so they are a genetics and breeding institute where they focus on that. They are creating, and I say creating in quotes, because it's just natural selection, right? So they're just breeding oysters in different environments so that they're conditioned for those environments. So they'll take, bags of oysters and put them in a really, really salty river. Every so often, they'll come back, they'll call out the dead ones, they'll put back the live ones. And then as those oysters become sexually mature, they mate them together. And then those traits pass along to the oyster babies.
Okay. I'm sorry, but that is so cool. So there are keystone species. In aquaculture, you can control them. How does the aquaculture system sit within like a larger water system? Or are they land-based or they're...
Yeah, so hatcheries are land-based, because you have tanks and different things like that. In the hatchery is where you want to have like your cleanest water. So you're pulling water from your water source. So you're right on the waterfront, pulling water in, we condition it, do all the things. When they get to that teenage stage, that's their first introduction into like natural raw water. So that's when they start learning how to eat that natural microalgae. And then when they get on the farm, they're already doing that. So like we're just taking them from what they naturally know how to do and just keeping them in like contained spaces where we're just basically making sure they're not competing with each other. So that's all it is.
When they get out the door, they get put into the Chesapeake or whatever real body butter. Depends, yeah.
Yeah, depends on what you're using it for. So if you want to do restoration, right, you do the same things as you would in the hatchery. Everything for commercial and restoration are the same in the hatchery. When they get to that teenage stage, like that's where the split happens. So for restoration, we don't care about individual oysters. We want those big oyster clusters, basically. So instead of putting them on oyster culture, we put them on clean oyster shells because that's what they would naturally do. So then when we put the oyster shells back into the Chesapeake, you'll have 10 baby oysters that are already growing on one shell. And that's a mini reef within itself. So you're putting out thousands of reefs to create one big reef. In commercial, you want nice, pretty, individual, deep cup oysters like everyone loves on the half shell. So that's why we use Colch for that.
This is so interesting to me. So the ones that are for restoration, can you just talk a little bit about how the oysters do filter the water and like their benefit to the environment?
Yeah, one oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day. And no matter how long that oyster is in the water, it's still really good for the environment. And it's getting out all of those, pollutants and toxins and things like that, which I know kind of skeeves people out about eating oysters. But the great thing about it is that they have like an enzyme or, in their gut that breaks all of that down and then they secrete it out. So it doesn't actually stay.
That does make me feel better, right? I'm listening to this and I'm like, so the pollutants go in and where do they go afterwards? Actually, have you heard of the Billion Oyster Project, which is in New York City, which is where I'm based? And I was researching them a little bit because I'm interested in oysters and all the, beneficial effects. And I was trying to understand the best way to support them. I'm like, oh, I'm going to buy some oysters from them. Well, on their website, they're like, no, we do not sell oysters. They would kill you. Like anything that's growing in, New York waters around where Billion Oyster Project is working is not something we should eat. So
no, and that's the thing too, is like it has to depend on the environment because oysters take on the flavor of their environment.
I imagine you were partial to the oysters of the Chesapeake Bay, but there's so many oysters. Have you done oyster tastings all around?
Oh yeah. No, I actually love, I might get my like East Coast card revoked, but I love West Coast seafood. Like I went over to Taylor Shellfish and was in like Seattle and was just like, this is the best seafood that I've ever had. Like I'd never had gooey duck before. I had known about gooey duck, but gooey duck sashimi, I think just changed my whole life. Honestly, I don't know what it was about it, but like, yeah, I don't know. I love, I'm not like a multiple dozen oyster type person. I mostly like it to taste the flavor profile, to like, understand the farm. Like I love the whole story behind it. So I'll get like, 2 of each one to try, but I like kind of mild oysters.
Oh, I love that. You're getting very specific because of course they take on the flavor of the season and whatever nutrients they're taking in.
There's sometimes like the salt content is a little much for me. Like I love Maine oysters at a certain time of year. It pains me because there's so many oyster farms that I love up there, like up in New England. And when I go at a certain time, I'm like, oh, you're going to be so salty. Like it's just like and I hate to say like a salty booger, but like it really is just like, I feel like I'm just dipping a cup into the sea and just drinking it. But that's just me. I just like, I'm from Maryland. We have a very mild taste to it, which a lot of people like. A lot of people don't like. It's a little bit sweeter to me, brinier. I'm good with the variety. I like to try.
And you're not sick of oysters? You're not like, I never want to taste one of these again. I've just seen too much?
No, I think like a lot of people are doing some really creative things with oysters right now. I'm definitely like a seafood girly foodie. I'll geek out over some seafood. Like, and my friends kind of sometimes get embarrassed now because like, I'll ask all the questions like, okay, so where's this from? Where do we get it? Is there a little ticket that was in the bag? Can I see when it was caught? Like, I'm asking all the questions and I'm being like super annoying. But like, again, it's just because I like the story.
Wait a minute, but are these all questions we should all be asking? I'm so curious, like, what is the ticket in the bag?
Okay, so I have on my 2025 bingo card to level up my seafood girly essence in general. And so there's a few things that you can do that are just going to level up just your interaction involvement in seafood. One is always know where your seafood comes from as much as you can, right?
Isn't that so tricky? I mean, it's the least transparent industry.
It is, but there's ways to read a label. So with seafood, it's different. I think it's a little different than a regular food label, right? You have to like really know what you're looking at on a seafood label to know what information to get out of it. So like there's some seafood labels, like even with like frozen fish, that are like a whole paragraph of like, and we do this and we are dedicated to the integrity of our seafood, and none of that is important. I love the pledge, but like skip all that. Perfect example is, and I was just telling my friend this because she was asking me like, is canned tuna, can you be sustainable with canned tuna? And I was like, absolutely, right? Absolutely, you can. And one of the things is that there's this trend going around about dolphin-safe tuna. I love the notion, but eco-labeling is real. And one of the ways that you can prove that canned tuna is actually dolphin-safe is by the way that they catch it. And it says it right on the can. Regardless of what, logos or whatever is on it, emblems, whatever. Look at the back of the can. If it says caught by trawl line or trawl net, there is absolutely no way that can be dolphin safe. Like the nets that they go out, they put the net out, it goes out for, a couple miles, it drags behind the boat, they pull in what they can. And it's not just what their targeted species is, it's everything that gets in the way of that net, which is sometimes dolphins, turtles, all the things. And when they are picking out what the target species is, that stuff is just laying on the boat most of the time. Sometimes you'll have like one person that's getting all the bycatch off so that it can go back and live in the water. But oftentimes it's just out, and by the time it gets back in the water, it's already dead. So now there's this new thing, dolphin safe tuna, which again, if it's by any type of net, not happening. But if it says caught by hook and line, that's dolphin safe, because that each one of those tunas has to be caught by a fishing hook. So there's no bycatch really there. Another thing is too, I've been seeing a lot of people, especially over the summer, right, really bashing on oysters because like they're making people sick, they're sending people to the hospital. And I'm putting that in air quotes because it's not about the oysters. We've been really disrespecting oysters like a lot. And like, I can't stand for it as a seafood girly, but it's mostly about like where you get it from, right? Like I love Backyard Billy that's got oysters, and I'll get them roadside all day long. But also we got to look at the circumstances is there ice in that container that Backyard Billy has the oysters in? Is the water in the ice melted? Is that dirty? Like, you know what I mean? There's like all these things, even at a seafood market, right? For me, I love going to farmers markets and going to the seafood like tables. I love that. But when I walk up, I'm asking myself, I'm looking at the surrounding, I'm like, okay, ice is fresh, refreshing, everything looks good, nothing's sitting in its own secretions or anything like that. Awesome. I walk up. Second question I'm asking is, okay, what do we got here and where is this from? Perfect. Okay, cool. Love that. Third question is, when was this caught? Okay, which you can ask. And if the person that you're asking behind the counter or as somebody there does not know, don't buy. Don't buy. I'm just going to say for me, because I don't like to tell people what to do about their seafood choices. So when you get through those three questions, if you are satisfied with all three of those answers for you, buy the seafood. Another thing is I was talking about the ticket, right? And this is like a little hack, right? And I know some people will probably be like, oh, this is a lot, or, oh, I'm not going to do this. But guarantee you, you can do it. So every time I go and get oysters somewhere, I ask the waiter or the waitress, can you go back to the chef and ask them for the oyster ticket that was in the bag? Most waiters and waitresses don't know what I'm talking about. And they're like, I don't think that we have them. Like, no. Go back. I know you probably don't know, but your chef knows because they have to know, or whoever bought those oysters in. That ticket is required to be in every bag. And the ticket comes from the oyster farm. So it's when it's the date that the bag came in. It's, where it was harvested, what time it was harvested, all the information you need to know. So every time I ask, and every single time they come back with this like big smile on their face. They're like, the chef knew exactly what I was talking about. And I was like, thank you.
I love that it turns out that people actually come back and they have the information. I'm like, be interesting to try that in New York. I'm going to try it sometime and ask for the ticket. Now, you launched something called Minorities in Aquaculture, a nonprofit, which seems like a fantastic way to get more people of color on the water and back to the water. Could you just describe a little bit of the history of people on the water then being sort of denied the water and returning to the water, and start there, and then we'll get to minorities and aquaculture.
Let's start from the very beginning. Indigenous peoples were already eating seafood. That seafood was a primary source of their diet. And when African slaves came over and were pushed and living near the water's edge, that's where, they learned from the Native Americans back in the same areas how to do what they do. Eat seafood, pick seafood, all these other things. So they got some of those skills. They also brought skills from Africa too, fishing skills from Africa. And so African Americans specifically, like in the United States, at one point were the backbone for the fishing industry that we have today, and a lot of the practices that we have today and still use today. But it mostly, being a waterman or working on the water or eating seafood was not a high commodity. I mean, that's why you hear that lobsters were called the cockroaches of the sea, or oysters were the bugs of the sea, because it wasn't like a rich man thing to do. You were eating seafood to feed your families because it was there and it was an available resource. So as time went on, they got into other types of maritime, working on boats. Obviously, Frederick Douglass was a mariner, different things like that, used his knowledge of the waterways to escape slavery. Same thing with Harriet Tubman. She lives right here where I'm from on the Chesapeake Bay. Both Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass are from the Chesapeake Bay.
That's incredible. I didn't know that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that history?
Blackwater Refuge is probably 30 minutes from me. And where my family originated from was back in those marshes where the Underground Railroad is. That's where Frederick Douglass's childhood home is there. I think Harriet Tubman's childhood home is back there. So the Harriet Tubman Museum is back there. So yeah, Chesapeake Bay was definitely the marshes and the waterways, the tides were definitely ways that African Americans back then were not only using that for their livelihood, but also using it for their survival. So when I was doing a lot of my thesis research, I realized that the relationship to the water was, when we came to the United States, was never truly our own. We had to kind of build it, right? We had a relationship with the water back in Africa, came over, very traumatic, and then having to rebuild that. But then as, Industrial Revolution happened, different things like that, as technology just kind of increases and ramps up. That's when you kind of get the imbalance of African Americans. And I think also kind of that generational kind of dip down too, right? That was, again, one of the things I, recognized in my thesis after talking to the last existing Black watermen on the Chesapeake Bay, 12 of them, all of the age of 60, with no true younger generations really coming behind them to take over their boats and things like that. And with talking with them, like I said, that perspective of there's nothing for you here, and that's in this small town, was really what they were pushing their children to do. Again, African Americans getting access to higher education, being able to go to college at the exact same time. That's when fisheries and maritime no longer became a necessity. It became an optional occupation. I tried to look at it from a social, economical, political, and cultural standpoint of this question of how did African Americans go from the prominent demographic within the maritime industry on the Chesapeake Bay to now only having 12, or less than that. And really, it's a lot of different things. There was a lot of stories and a lot of things going around that are still happening to this day of African Americans being pushed out by their white counterparts. When I talked to these older Black watermen, there was something that came up that was really kind of significant, was this waterman's creed. And they all talked about this waterman's creed of didn't have too many troubles with, the white watermen. When we were out there on the water, we were all watermen. It didn't really matter. When we got back to the dock, they went their way and we went another way. So that's when society came in. So at the end of the day, it's really the waterman creed and the waterman culture is just declining in general. And
so I guess that's the heart of what you're saying, is that the creed and the climate for watermen is declining. And why is that? Like, why overall is there a decline?
I would say gentrification of working waterfronts, a lack of understanding of what a working waterfront is. I mean, you get, especially like after the pandemic, I get everybody wanted to move out of the city. That's why I don't live in a city, because I'm not a city person. And then when you get like, inner city people, which we love people coming in for ecotourism and loving like the Eastern Shore, but it's also like when they're buying multi-million-dollar houses, then there comes this like autonomy, I guess, quote unquote, that comes with like their waterfront that's in front of their house, which I get. But those people have to ask themselves, well, why did I feel the spark to move here in the first place? And it was because of the working waterfront. Going to those dock bars and eating the seafood and having the drinks, all that, I want to elevate my small town too, but there has to be a balance, and not understanding the culture and sort of the core significance about a working waterfront, I think is a little dangerous, especially when you want to protest, like, within community comment against like boats like coming by your house at 6 a.m. or no, I don't want that oyster farm or those cages in front of my dock, or oh, like I don't want this or I don't want that. And it's like they, have kind of the pull in the community to be able to say like what goes and what doesn't go. And it's like kind of combating all the working waterfront stuff that we're trying to build up right now. Every working waterfront is having the same issue, whether it's like an infrastructure issue, a population issue, sea level rise issue, the capacity issue. Like, all working waterfronts are really kind of going through their own kind of sense of gentrification right now.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca, where great minds meet the great outdoors. Check them out at visitithaca.com. Ithaca is known for outstanding dining and local cider, wine, and beer. And here's a quick word from one of these great local businesses.
My name is Steve Seelan from South Hill Cider. So I started making cider about 20 years ago, and I made cider exclusively from wild apples for the first 10 years. And then around 2014, I decided to plant some actual cider apples in an orchard to start cider production, just like a small winery. We have a tasting room. You can see the orchard, you can see the valley, and we pour tastings of our ciders. We have about 20 different ciders that we make. So there are beautiful hiking trails and gorges and waterfalls all over this area. And in fact, we're located right on the Finger Lakes Trail, where in 15 minutes you can walk down to a 140-foot waterfall that's on a land trust property.
If you're looking for a weekend away, you can't do much better than Ithaca. Check out visitithaca.com for more information and get to where great minds meet the great outdoors.
You founded a nonprofit to get more minorities in aquaculture. What was the origin of that for you?
I was randomly watching the Netflix show Chef's Table in January of 2020, and the Chef Mashama Bailey's episode was on. In the first 6 minutes or so, it's like her on the boat and then her with some oysters. And when I tell you that was random, like I was just like watching the series, and I think I was like doing dishes or something, and I like heard her voice, and I was like saw the water, and I was like, black woman on the water, like that's interesting. And then it was like black woman is she on an oyster farm? Oh my God, are those black oyster hands? I was talking out loud. I rewound that first 6 minutes of her episode probably like 20 times just to make sure I saw what I saw. That was kind of like the start of it. I reached out to Ernest Jr. from the McIntosh and Son seafood company or oyster company down in Savannah, Georgia. The ones who were featured in that episode, Chef's Table, who Mashamba, works with all the time. And I reached out to them and just cold called them, and I emailed them, and I was like, oh my God, I just watched this. I'm a black oyster farmer in Maryland. I've never met other black oyster farmers, would love to talk to you. So I got on the phone with them, and we had such a great conversation. I'll never forget Ernest Sr., I can still hear him say it to this day, in his accent. And I asked him, I was like, is it just me? Is it just because I've only worked in Maryland and Virginia? Is there other people out there? I don't want to be ignorant and be going around and say I'm the only one, or like whatever, if like that's not true, if like I just haven't seen them. And he said, Imani, every time we go to these oyster events or, conferences or whatever, we're the only speck of pepper in a sea of salt. I said, Roger that, sir. I totally understand. And from there, I just understood okay, it's not just me. I just wanted to find other women of color that were in this, doing this thing, and create a community. And it's just become so much more over the last 5 years. And I think it's really an ode to the beginning, the early years of my career, for the things that I didn't get as a woman in general. And then that's also been kind of a ongoing conversation internally and externally about MIA too, is for me, in my experience, right, I can advocate for them on that level because I have some level of understanding. But yeah, it just was really my love for my career and just wanting to do something that was going to be impactful and just continues to be impactful.
And you were talking about how you want to help people not experience some of the things that you did experience. So maybe you could talk about the scholarships or internships that you are offering and what people have taken advantage of in terms of MIA. And by the way, such a good acronym, right? I mean, that was so smart. It took me a minute. I'm I get my notaries in agriculture. And then last night, as I was prepping, I'm oh my God, MIA, missing in action. That's so amazing.
Thank you. That acronym came to me at 6 a.m. in the morning. I was oh my God, this is awesome. It makes me cringe when people call MIA Mia. Oh, it makes me cringe. And I don't want to correct them because I know what you're talking about. We're talking about important things. So I don't be MIA every time I say, but every time someone says Mia, my soul just dies a little bit. But yeah, no, it's we've got 2 programs right now. Our aquaculture internship program is something I'm super proud of because, again, it's just an ode to the early parts of my career and really giving women of color this opportunity to explore aquaculture and any careers that are possible for them. There's so many niche gaps that are in aquaculture right now where I'm please, somebody take it. This is what you want to do. You don't even have to work on a farm. And so we work with some really, really great farms, oyster farms, kelp farms. We work with labs. We work with institutions. So we've had interns from, I want to say about 18, 19 different states. Yeah, I was I even still get a little pushback from some people that want to be partners are oh, well, I don't really feel comfortable with your intern on the boat and blah, blah, blah. So I was say no more. And I fixed that last year. And we had an orientation. I brought all 12 interns from all over the country to Maryland. And we did a whole week we went to Capitol Hill. We did policy and agriculture with EDF, who graciously funded orientation. But then the second week, we came to the Eastern Shore to one of the campgrounds here, and we worked with Chesapeake College, which is a community college here, and everybody got their boater safety license and their marine troubleshooting certification the week before they went to their farm. And so then you can't argue with me that my intern is not qualified because I guarantee you that she's more qualified than all of those guys that are on that boat right now. So now, what's another argument? You pay them $17.50 an hour. We pay for housing, transportation, field gear. But the great thing about this program that I don't really talk about enough is that we have very proudly, and I'm not going to get emotional when I say this, we very proudly have doubled the amount of African Americans that are working in the maritime industry in just 4 years by this program. Yeah, we've graduated 9, men and women. And some of our women are the youngest women right now of color that hold a captain's license in the Chesapeake Bay. Our first cohort was such a special cohort because 90% of that cohort were actually the next generation of those Black watermen. The sons, the nephews, the nieces, that next generation, they had already tried to take the test, right? It's a long process. It's a 12-week process. It's in person. It's for 4 to 5 hours, once a week. It's 100 questions a week. And then you've got to take multiple breaks of tests and then do the physical and the paperwork. And it's such a long process. And the course is, around like 1,500 all said and done for one person. And so, with that, we were able to give them the support, give them in-person study sessions, give them virtual weekly study sessions with our, the youngest Black captain that's around right now, Captain Mike McQueen. Shout out to him. His dad, Sonny McQueen, is the oldest Black captain that's living right now. He's, I think, 85. People that had taken the test 2 or 3 times before passed on the very first time.
Congratulations. That is amazing. We're going to move into the speed round version. So let's start with a person who has inspired you to be who you are today.
There's a couple of people that are coming to my mind right now, but I would say the first person that comes to mind is George Hill. He actually is a Black waterman that isn't written about much at all, but was the first Black and white waterman of the Chesapeake Bay to export female blue crabs to Japan.
Very cool. If you're going to create a meal for friends that was nourishing for you, nourishing for them, and nourishing for the planet, what would that meal be?
Definitely different types of oysters. Definitely, gotta have some, Chesapeake Bay oysters in there. So maybe, get, one of my faves, Orchard Point Oyster Company. Shout out to my buddy Scott, who's the owner of that. Let's do New England. I just tried some Rhode Island oysters. I just met some of those oyster farmers too. They're really, really, really nice people. Walrus and Carpenter is a really great oyster farm. I love their oysters. Go to Maine, obviously Naughty Sisters, Lane's Island, Emily's Oysters, all those gal pals. Definitely have to have that gooey duck sashimi from Taylor Shellfish. Definitely. And then I'll go to my second home in Alaska and I'll get some king crab over in Alaska.
I'm joining you for that meal. So just let me know what's on the table. What is your most controversial opinion?
That seafood is like a white tablecloth, fancy, type of thing. I think that's so preposterous. I think it honestly is it's wild to me, again, how we went from having lobsters be the cockroaches of the sea to now lobsters being what, $45 a pound or something ridiculous like that. I don't know about you, but I love eating oysters and crabs in the backyard. We don't have enough community and consumership in that community in seafood right now.
And what is the idea or the word that motivates you every day?
I'm gonna expose my little, I guess my athlete brain a little bit here. So I have a sticky note. I have a ton of sticky notes around here, but I have this one particular sticky note, and it it says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. I have another sticky note that says people think MIA is a joke and don't forget it. Not because people do, but because every time I look at it, I get a little pissed, especially when I'm tired. But again, that athlete brain, just that extra motivation. I think Michael Jordan people did it, where they just replayed all the negative things that people said as motivation. So sometimes I look at that and I'm like, well, if they do, they're about to be disappointed today. And I
because today we win.
Exactly. So yeah, I would probably say those two.
And if people want to support minorities in aquaculture or learn more about what you're doing, where can they find you?
I'm personally on all socials, Imani Black, Imani with 2 I's and 2 K's on IG. And then Minorities in Aquaculture is all on socials and the internet. Honestly, if you Google Minorities in Aquaculture, we're the only thing that's coming up. So we're pretty easy to find. But yeah, follow us on our socials, go to our website, check out our merch. I got some merch on right now, our blue crew neck. We'll have some merch launching pretty soon. But yeah, support us in all the ways.
Amazing. It's been so much fun to talk to you, and I've learned so much. I'm just delighted to know about the sex life of an oyster, and also, how great they are for all of us to eat and to help the environment. So thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Hey, if you enjoyed that conversation, which of course I hope you did, check me out on Instagram where we have some extra content, and subscribe wherever you can subscribe for podcasts, and leave those little stars. You know, it's something that I never like to talk about, but other people do. And I want people to be able to hear this podcast and spread the word, which is how we're going to make a better future together. And it really helps us out. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being a great listener, because you got this far. And have a great day.
I'm Jessica Badalana, staff editor at King Arthur Baking Company.
And I'm David Tamarkin, King Arthur's editorial director.
And this is Things Bakers Know, a new podcast from King Arthur where we explore every corner of the baking world.
Every episode of Things Bakers Know dives deep into a different baked good, its history and lore,
trends, takes, and opinions.
A lot of opinions, and plenty of tips and tricks.
Plus, we'll always leave time to answer your home baking questions.
Along the way, we break bread with the best bakers, historians, and restaurateurs in America, and we always get their expert advice.
So join us at King Arthur as we celebrate the wide world of baking on Things Bakers Know.
Out now wherever you listen. Subscribe now so you won't miss an episode.
Head to kingarthurbaking.com/podcast to learn more. That's kingarthurbaking.com/podcast.
And until then, please, people, remember to follow the recipe.